In this video, we take a look at the woman behind the Ultimate Guide to Renovation course, one of Australia's most respected property educators, Jane Slack-Smith.
I think she's probably very understated.
Approachable and very friendly and warm.
Looking at what she's done, what she's been able to achieve, and to get to a point of financial independence.
She's got her head screwed on and she's been able to apply things really well. And
her whole story is full of triumph, and her whole life is full of triumph.
I've been following Jane online probably for about 2 years now.
She's just a straight shooter. She seems like a really reasonable person, and I get the feeling that she genuinely wants to help.
I've done a bit of research on her, and she strikes me as one of those amazingly determined women who just, that seems to be through their whole life, they're just kind of kicking goals and making a statement because of who they are.
Jane first came to the Australian public's attention reluctantly when in 1989, as a young mining engineer at her first mine placement, she found herself the centre of a walkout by New South Wales coal miners protesting at her presence on site. In 1997, Jane's story was featured on ABC TV's Australian Story program.
The producer from Australian Story called. I was ready to hang up, actually. I thought it was a joke. And he rang back, which was nice of him, and we talked a bit, and he said, this would be a really great story. First girl to legally work underground. There was 2 of us that turned up on the same day in New South Wales and created a bit of a stir, and the men went out on strike, and it was a bit of an issue. And I just wasn't comfortable being in front of the camera. I wasn't comfortable sharing my life story. And Ben was very persistent. And about a year later, he pulled out the big guns and said, what if you could motivate other people to get into the mining industry, and in particular other girls? And I thought, oh gosh, I kind of had to do this by myself, and there hadn't been females to blaze the way. If I had someone who I could say had been there before and shared their experiences, then that would probably help. So he kind of blackmailed me into it, to be honest. But yeah, so it was an interesting experience sharing my life and with the world.
In 2006, Jane was recognised for her contribution to the industry, being named in the inaugural Who's Who of Australian Women.
I had a fantastic job. I had a great company behind me. I got to travel internationally. I got to travel to every mine site in Australia. I got to meet new and interesting people all the time. And I really enjoyed that. And I spent, pretty much everything and a little bit more of what I earned for many years. And when I was about 28, I picked up a copy of Rich Dad, Poor Dad, and he said, do you work for your money, or does your money work for you? And it really was that turning point for me, where I sat back and I thought, I'm going to be set for many, many years just working for someone else, and I'll be earning some money, and at the end of every week or month, I'm going to make sure that I have to go back to work because I haven't got anything saved. So, I really took that to heart and thought I have to do something different. And so I looked at shares in the stock market, and it was really interesting. I day traded on paper for a while thinking, well, this is the way to do it. But I just got so frustrated because, I couldn't actually have any control. And on the whim of a decision, the board, everything that I had thought my research was based around was changed. So I then met my now husband, and he said, there's this thing, the property, it doesn't have to be your home. It could be an investment. And so, we started looking into that, and I guess that's kind of where my education of how to acquire wealth and income through property, and not just through the job day to day, was born.
Over a 12-year period, Jane and her husband have built up an international multi-million-dollar property portfolio. But where did it all start?
When I started, everything was so daunting. There was so much information, and every time I read a great enlightening story about someone who'd made money out of property, there was also the counter story of someone who'd lost money in property as well. But I knew I had to take a step. What I did was I read all the books, and I went to all the seminars, and I thought, I'm not going to spend too much money on this just in case I've got it wrong. So I didn't want to go and spend thousands of dollars on a seminar just in case, I was being taken advantage of or something. So there were some great, Bible type books like Jan Summers' books. So I started reading those, and they were low risk. And my background was an explosives engineer. I dealt with risk every single day. So thinking about, I guess, property in the terms of risk, for me, it allowed me to go, oh, okay, so if I can minimise the risk and do this, in a concerted effort and, create some kind of system, that'd be great. So I then tried to find a system. And that's when I started reading all of these books and found out that everyone has something different to add. And I really had to, I guess, buckle down and find out what was going to work for me. After I had been through my journey of education, and I'm still on it. I still go to seminars. I still pick up books almost monthly on property because you can always pick up something. I got to the point where I realised that there were some key characteristics of what people were doing right. They were setting their goals beforehand. They understood the value of getting the right property in the right place. Now, as an engineer, I was really good at Excel spreadsheets. So when they started talking about statistics and doing the numbers, that really resonated. Those that said, you kind of get a gut feel, that didn't really resonate, and I didn't want to leave anything to chance. So, I did my numbers, I did all the work behind finding the right area, and then it came down to finding the right property. And now my strategy was renovation. I needed to create equity because I only started with $45,000. So I wanted to get it right the first time because I wasn't willing to actually make a mistake. And I did, which was great with the first property that I bought.
In 2001, starting with just $45,000, Jane purchased her first renovation project in the Melbourne suburb of Carlton.
I bought for $425,000, I did a $50,000 renovation, and 9 months later had it valued at $700,000. For me, that was years of hard-earned cash. And when that worked, I then knew that I had the opportunity, the skills, the knowledge, and I had some remorse about some of the mistakes I'd made. I got a little emotional on some of the decorating decisions, so I knew there were some improvements to be made. So the second property came along. Now I moved at that stage from Melbourne to Sydney, so the $425,000 bought me a lot less. So I had to do a lot more, and I had to be a lot more, focused on finding the right location and the right property because I didn't have a lot of cash to then do the renovation straight away. So the second property came along, and so we're seeing so many properties. We put in offers over 10, we had 4 accepted, and we ended up buying 2 properties. So, the property that I bought was near Newtown. It was a lovely little terrace. It had great opportunity, and that area has obviously developed really well.
Jane systematically chose the locations of her properties following a strict set of criteria.
The strategy that we developed, in the beginning, which has now been called the Trident strategy, which was really, focusing on buying below the market by understanding intimately what the market was, actually then adding value by renovating and being in a good growth area. So we had 3 ways to make money. Being the risk engineer that I was, I wanted to make sure that if I got option 1 wrong, I had 2 to fall back on. So, for me, getting that right with the first property was so important that we kind of perfected the strategy before we needed to replicate it. So every property after that, we were always looking for those 3 things and those 3 opportunities. And, there's some properties that we have in our portfolio that we haven't renovated. There's some we've renovated twice, but there's some we haven't renovated, but they have the potential for renovation. So even if renovation is the strategy, which it is for us, it doesn't necessarily have to be activated straight away. It just gives you, a little bit more in the pie for yourself for later.
As Jane's successes began to mount, people around her started to notice.
So I started acquiring properties, and as I did that, the people around me at work, I might be on a mine site in the middle of Mount Isa waiting to push the button and do a blast, and these guys would say, how are you buying so many properties? I would say, well, how aren't you? We're on the same income. And so I kind of started these little toolbox talks, which is what they call them in the mining industry, where you get together for a concerted chat on one topic about what I was doing. And I found people were really interested in that. And then, my friends had obviously been tolerant of my time away from them while I was renovating, and they could see the before and afters of what we were doing. So, it really got to the stage where people were asking me, how did you do that? I think I want to do that as well. So for me, it wasn't about teaching, the bells and whistles and, the flashy side of property. It was about, the nuts and bolts. What do you need to do to get it right? What are the mistakes I've made that most people won't tell you, so you don't have to make them yourself? And for me, the education was more around, it started with my friends. It was more around how can I share what I've learned and the system that I've developed so that other people can shortcut the errors and the mistakes and, get to the point where they can be one of those people that says, I've got a successful property and I might be able to have a second or a third and create themselves the wealth that could bring if they buy the right property in the right place.
Today, Jane resides in inner city Melbourne, where she splits her time between teaching low-risk techniques to property investors and assisting clients who are seeking finance to build their own property portfolios. So how did she take the step from property investor to property educator?
That kind of moving into the education space was a difficult step to take. And so for years, when people asked me to mentor or to give them education, I was saying, no, I'm not that person. And someone pointed it out to me. I had, a series of maybe 3 or 4 clients that came back and said, we've got completely ripped off by we bought this property in the wrong area, or they made money out of doing some construction thing and we didn't see any, and these people were putting their trust in others because I was not filling that role. And so I went from the very strong opinion is I wasn't going to be the person who stood on stage and went, run to the back of the room and buy this now. I was never going to be that person. But then I realised that there was this kind of gap where people were falling through, and if I wasn't going to fill the education space, then someone was going to step in and say, here I am, listen to what I have to say. And I didn't fully believe that they were leading them in the right direction. So I had a lot of clients who, maybe invested $50,000 in an education program, and 18 months later, didn't have the borrowing capacity to buy anything because they still had that debt and they didn't actually have a property. So, it was a real struggle for me. It was a real struggle to go from the, here I am just giving you information, to providing more and, being compensated obviously for providing that information, because it takes a lot of time and effort to pull it together. This has taken over 9 months in just filming alone. But I think a lot of people, when I started, I didn't know who to trust, and I felt that if I put my money in someone, I could have lost it all. And I know that's a fear. I still have that fear, but I'm willing now, being a bit more educated in looking at doing the research on who the person is and what their track record is and what people say about them, and that's how I invest my education dollars. And I do that, and I invest a lot in educating myself, because that's one of the assets that I have. And if I learn something good, it's about sharing it, because if I share it, I learn more about it and I learn people's different perspectives on it, and I grow.